First bit is terrestrial biodiversity and wetlands. So when we're talking about terrestrial biodiversity, we're mainly thinking about vegetation and the associated species that live in that habitat, and of course wetlands. So first of all, why do we care? Why are they valued? So they provide habitat for a range of species, as I said. They have cultural values, their aesthetics and natural character and sense of places. People like walking into the podcut forest up in the hills. Particularly for wetlands, they have, people talk about ecosystem services, so they provide a function. And in terms of wetlands, they do these types of things, so filter nutrients as they come into a stream, or they trap sediment, or they moderate flood flows and also allow low flows to get into streams. And of course, people recreation in these types of areas. So this is a map created by a colleague of mine. I'll just explain the key. The blue areas that are either intact native or areas of high ecological significance. The yellow areas are a mix of, as I just said, intact native vegetation and high ecological values, but also with some pasture. And the red area is areas that have been modified. It's not to say that the red areas have no values whatsoever. There are still critters that live in the soils. There's still birds that live on the plains. It's just the saying that they are different from what they were 100, 200 years ago. What I get from this map is that over the course of human settlement, there's been a lot of change, particularly in this area. And when you look back into the record, a lot of this change occurred, particularly after European settlers, so drained a lot of the wetlands in the lower area and changed the vegetation makeup of the rest of the plains. I also see quite a lot of highlights in the area still. So you get the Dock Estate, of course, up in the hills, along riparian margins, for instance, the Ashley Rakahuri, and not shown on this map, but particularly down by the Waimakariri. There's a lot of good habitat that's still available. The Ashley Gorge, the estuary, and the coastal wetlands. One thing to note about the biodiversity and vegetation is that while a lot of the change occurred 100 to 150 years ago, there's still progressive changes in biodiversity across the plains and even into the Lees Valley. So this slide is looking at wetlands and springs. So these small green dots here are springs. A lot of you might call them undercurrents or underrunners. And the blue patches up here and along the coast are the remnant wetlands. The work we've done estimates about 90 to 95% of the wetlands have been drained in the zone. And as you can see from this map, a lot of them, the remaining wetlands are along the coast and into the Lees Valley. For the springs, you get a lot of springs where the wetlands used to be, and a lot of these are permanently flowing or mostly flowing. You also get a series of springs associated with the Eyre River. These ones are ephemeral, and they tend to only flow after you get big floods in the Eyre River. So this is one of the community outcomes of the Waimakariri Zone community. And this is the aim is for Indigenous biodiversity in the zone to be protected and improved. And I guess I've highlighted it at risk because there has been changes through time and there still are changes occurring in the zone. So if I go next one. So as I said before, there are actually, I think, some real gems in this area, and I think the estuary is one of them. So this is a map showing the Ashley Estuary. You can see Saltwater Creek flowing in to the north. Taranaki Creek flows in here, and this is the main stem of Ashley Rakahuri. As Gail, so the estuary is a sensitive environment, and it's at the bottom of the catchment. And as Gail said, it's culturally really significant. People collect mahanga kai here, It's close to Kaiapoi Pa, and I believe people used to come in and land canoes in this area, for instance. It's also socially really important. You know, people kite surf in the estuary, ride horses, walk their dogs, go bird watching, and a range of other things. And it's also environmentally significant. So you get things like this is a worm that you find in some of the sediments. Of course, lots and lots of braided birds. And depending on who you ask, the estuary is either internationally or nationally significant for bird life. I'm not sure if this is coming out very well, but this is a little crab coming out from a hole. And of course, some vegetation. So all in all, it's highly valued. So I'm just going to concentrate on a couple of points about the estuary. In the water quality in the estuary, nitrate concentrations are relative, they often exceed the thresholds for this environment, and bearing in mind that it's a sensitive environment. And a lot of those, the nitrate comes from inflows from the rivers, so Saltwater Creek, Taranaki Creek and the main stem. So nitrate, one of the things that it does is encourage algae growth, and what algae growth does is a couple of things. It can trap sediment, so you start building up fine sediment in the estuary. The other thing it can do, and it's kind of shown in this middle picture, is when it dies, the algae dies, what it will do is deplete the water and the sediment of oxygen, and it makes it for a very, very poor habitat for things to live in. There's a couple more things we'll highlight. So sedimentation, we think, is possibly an issue in the estuary. We need to go back and do a bit more work. We've only got one. This map here shows a series of mapping that we did of the sediments in the estuary, and we need to go back in time and figure out if there's been changes in that fine cover. So sedimentation is a natural phenomenon, but it can be exacerbated by human activities. And this map here, I've just put in some arrows. These are the soft muds and sands and very soft muds and sands. They're associated with that sedimentation problems. So for many years, we have been monitoring E. coli in the estuary, and that gives us an indicator of suitability for swimming and eating shellfish. And it's often very poor, so it's very high levels of E. coli. So recently we did, at the beginning of this year, we went and did some sampling called fecal source tracking. What that does is it's able you to identify in a very high level sense where that material came from. And it showed 90 to 99% of the fecal matter in the estuary came from birds. And then in the order of 1 to 10% came from ruminants, so cows, sheep and goats. So when I take all those pieces of information together, again, this is the community outcome as articulated by the Waimakariri Zone Committee. My classification is at risk for a couple of reasons. This Ashley River includes the estuary, and it's probably not meeting this, but for particularly good reason. As Gail alluded to before, it's not really satisfying cultural values, mana whenua values, and I guess overall it's probably at risk.